Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei got harem with Irina, Raynare and Sona? Part 1. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei no! Shouted Riaz, as if it would somehow save her beloved red dragon. Fenrir hit the ground on all fours, carrying his prize in his mouth, tasting its blood. As Kiba and Zenobia came to unleash their fury on him, he tossed his mortally wounded victim aside, preparing to fight the two devils. The victim was clad in crimson armor, with dark emerald gems and golden fangs and claws dotting it. There were also 3 rather large holes gushing with velvet streams of fresh blood. After a few seconds mid-air, a bright flash covered the scene, and the armor gave way to reveal a fatally wounded Issei Haidu. Everyone watched as Issei hit the ground and skip across the battlefield, leaving a trail of cracked earth and warm blood as he did. He gave out grunts of helpless pain as his limp body struck the ground with every bounce. Issei! Riaz shouted as she knelt beside Issei, cradling him in her arms while trying not to touch his wounds. Mjolnir hit the ground and created a deafening screech as it slid down a small hill and finally rested upright. "Hang in there," she said, trying to comfort him. "You'll be okay. Come on." Issei didn't care. His thoughts were focused on one thing: protecting her. He promised her he would do his best to protect her and his friends, to never let her down again. Yet here he was. Helpless. Dying. And there was nothing he can do about it. Riaz looked down on him, tears starting to fill her eyes as she watched him expectantly, waiting for any semblance of strength remaining in her pawn. She was thinking frantically of how to help him, any way to stop the pain he was going through. It hurt her to see him like this. It hurt her so much it made his wounds pale in comparison. There was nothing she could do now, and she knew that. All the phoenix tears were spent, having used them on Kiba and Saji earlier in the fight. She would give anything for another right now. Her tears started to drip onto Issei's bruised face. He looked up at her, his hazel eyes meeting hers. He mustered his strength and tried to keep his eyes open as he beheld hers. "I'm so sorry," he began, "I almost had him. My bad." He continued to stare into her eyes, which were now blue-green waterfalls of sadness and grief. "Riaz, I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me for letting you down like this." Riaz was taken aback for a brief moment. Was he really going to let his last moments of life be spent apologizing to someone who failed to care for him? Was he really that selfless? It almost irritated her at this point, having spent months with him, and he still fails to see how much he means to her. But she can't complain, after all, that's why she loved him. "I say please," she managed to reply between sobs. She lightly clutched one of the wounds on his abdomen, trying to stop it from bleeding, but she only managed to soak her hand in his blood. Issei lightly grunted as he continued to lose blood. "You've gotta go," he muttered, trying not to choke on the blood that was flooding out of his mouth as he did so. "Save cough yourselves." "No way," she replied, shaking her head in rebellion. Her tears dropped onto his wound on the chest, its salty sting making him wince. But they kept coming, as if her eyes were endless fountains. "I'll help you, Issei, you won't be alone," she told him. In truth, she just wanted to spend his last moments with him. Riaz was still an educated and smart devil, and she already calculated all of the outcomes, and Issei surviving was not one of them. "I won't let you die here," she proclaimed as she decided to let love cloud her judgment. She closed her eyes. She knew what she had to say, the hollow promise she was about to make. She closed her eyes, letting her tears flow down her cheeks, because she didn't want to see his eyes when she said this. "You're going to be okay." He interrupted her with his coughs and heavy breathing as he reached out his hand and attempted to sit up. "Issei," was all she could say as she tried to support his back. She saw that the holes went straight through, although slightly smaller in size at the back because of the shape of Fenrir's teeth, but they somehow bled more. "The hammer," he coughed out as he gestured towards Mjolnir. "We need it." He spat as his hand twitched with agony. His pain doubled because of the uncomfortable position his body was in. Slowly, he felt his legs give away, next his stomach, and then his upper body. He slammed to the ground with a thud as his body was now failing him. His lungs gave out one last grunt before he finally gave in, blood streaming out of his mouth and onto the ground below. His muscles relaxed and his fists unclenched. His eyelids started to slide down, a curtain signaling that the show was now over. His feet slid and his knees collapsed, his entire body now leaning horizontally onto Riaz's arms and lap. Riaz gasped as she and everyone else came to the same conclusion: Issei was dead. "I have to do something," she thought. She had been watching from her room in the void. If she was in doubt that she could ever feel emotions, she had no questions now. She felt sad, as if her heart had dropped out of her chest. She felt lonely, her first and best friend was now gone, and she couldn't help him, and above all she felt angry. Very, very angry. The whole universe felt a shiver crawl down their spine as a tear flowed down her cheek and dripped onto the floor. Hey Drake. You there? Yeah partner, I'm here. You had me worried there, you haven't said anything since the bite. I was wounded as well, you know. That's why your balance breaker disappeared. Where are we? I don't know. One moment my spirit is draining out of you, then the next. Could it be? Could we be in heaven? I doubt it, since you're a devil. But let me see. No, we can't be in heaven. How do you know that? Do you see breasts anywhere? Fair point. And we're certainly not in hell, so where are we? I wish I knew Drake. We should try too. Hello, Issei Haidu, a resonating voice interrupted their thoughts. I've been waiting. Who are you? Where am I? Issei frantically questioned. Do you wish your life could be different? That you could have done better? Been stronger? Drake, who is this guy? Issei mentally asked. I thought Drake was about to answer. To answer your question, I am the Creator, the Almighty, the Everlasting. You know me as God. How did you? Hear you? I am omniscient. I know all past, present and future. Oh okay, but how are you alive? I thought you died in the war. By your terms, yes, I did die. But I am much more than a mere existence. The rules of life and death do not hold me. In fact, I created those rules. It's been a long time, my lord, Drake suddenly spoke up. Ah, Drake. You haven't changed in the slightest, still itching to battle against your brother. But this time I think you have a candidate that can bring an end to that feud, God greeted him. What do you mean? I'm afraid I cannot say more on the matter, I would be revealing too much of my plan, God interrupted him. How many times is he going to do that? Drake complained in his head. My apologies Drake, but there are much more important issues at hand. You mean, my death? Issei asked sheepishly. Issei Haidu, what would you do to live again? God said, paying no attention to the boy's words. Issei thought for a moment. Did he really want to go back? The first thing he remembered were his parents. The Haidu residence. Dad sipping on morning coffee and reading the newspaper as mom prepared some ramen for breakfast, the breeze flowing in from the windows, the smell of the garden filling the house. Yes, he missed that. Then he remembered Mitsuda and Motohama. Yes, his two perverted best friends. If it weren't for them, he wouldn't have been able to survive all the bullying and shunning through grade school, and he wouldn't have transferred to Kuo Academy. Sure, they were perverted. But they were there when no one else was, to pat him on the back and help him get back up. They were good friends through and through. Yes, he missed them. Then he remembered his peerage and new friends from the supernatural. Riaz, Akeno, Asia, Kaneko, Kiba, Zenobia, Gasper, Irina, Roswis, Vali, Office, he missed them all. Their smiles, their laughs, and even their tears, he missed all of them. Finally he remembered her. He slightly winced at the memory. Would you die for me? But to be honest, he did miss her. A lot. Anything, he almost whispered, tears now forming in his eyes. I would do anything to see them all again. See them smile, hear them laugh. I would do anything to be with them again. Partner Drake muttered. He hated seeing Issei cry. I see. Well Haidu, you will be the first and quite possibly the last, God replied. What do you mean? This place I created this place for key people. This is a sort of pit stop between life and death, a temporary existence. You may know of this place as limbo or the afterlife or purgatory. You might even know of this place as the island of Patmos if you read my gospel, God explained. Island of Patmos, you mean where John wrote the Revelation? Issei queried. Impressive. Yes, John came here and I allowed him to witness the future. He held a sacred gear, like you. Has allowed him to see into the future, as a prophet. You might have also heard of my apostles who healed. They also wielded twilight healing, performing miracles on my behalf. You have met its current wielder Asia Argento. That explains it. But are you going to send me to heaven? No. You are the first to both express your desire to go back and give a selfless reason. Many of my saints wish to join their brothers and sisters in heaven, whereas the power-hungry wielders only wanted to go back for their own gain. I will grant your wish. Issei relaxed. Thank you, he began, God. You can call me however you want to, as long as you don't in vain. Okay, God, I get the feeling that this won't be without a price. Yes. Issei, you are a great man. A strong man. The man who will bring an end to the cycle and bring peace to all hearts, God commended Issei, making him smile shyly. But you are also weak in terms of power, and your perverted thoughts drain the strength you should be using to further your fate. You have wasted your time on perverted actions and have even ignored the women who love you, God reprimanded. Issei winced. I don't want to ignore them, but… Yes, I am aware of your trauma. Raynare needn't go to such extremes to kill you. It was unfortunate. You have my sincerest sympathies, God comforted him. So what is it you are asking of us, Lord? Drake butted in. I merely ask that you train to be stronger, master your power, and use your time wisely. Perverted thoughts are natural, but that is why I provided you with your harem. God proclaimed, chuckling towards the end. I worked hard on providing you with all you need, use the opportunity. Haha. Drake roared. See partner? I told you. Issei could only blush and look away from the direction the voice of God was coming from. Issei, do you want to be stronger? God asked. Yes, came the reply. Then you will need your arm back from Drake. Now just wait a minute, Drake began to retort. But in its stead, you must sacrifice something greater. What will it be, Issei Hayo? My heart. Issei almost shouted, interrupting the voice. Take my heart. There was silence for a moment, then came the reply, very well. Drake, if you please. Partner, I don't think this is a good idea. Drake warned. Do it, Drake. I know what I need to do now, Issei muttered. No, I cannot let you throw away your humanity. There must be another way. Drake Issei began to beg. I said no. Drake shouted. Look, I can take an eye, but nothing more. That would be sufficient, God commented. Fine, take my right one, it's seen more boobs, Issei remarked, remembering the peephole Mitsuda discovered. God chuckled. Already off to a great start. And be sure to use the harem I provided. Drake roared in laughter again. Once he stopped, a bright green flash covered Issei's body as Issei felt his arm return to his full control once again. Then he felt his right eye heat up and suddenly bones were broken and flesh was torn apart. Raya! Issei shouted in pain. In a moment he felt blood stream down his cheek. He brought his hand up to inspect the aftermath. He felt warm metal surrounding his eye and he felt 3 talons go about an inch down his cheek. His eye felt strange, his vision slightly blurred. He closed his left eye and realized that his right eye was sharper and could focus through greater distances. His boosted gear appeared on his left arm again. Take a look, partner. Issei brought up his arm so he could see his reflection. Indeed, crimson plating surrounded his eye, forming an inverted teardrop with a narrow end at the peak of his former cheekbone. 3 golden talons pointed down from his eye and reached until the edge of the narrow end, the middle being longer than the 2 at the side. His eye was in itself a thing of beauty. It resembled the typical eye of a serpent with an elongated and narrow pupil instead of the human round one. The usual brownish-orange hue was interlaced with a deep emerald hue and the veins were of alternating color. Will this be permanent? He asked, slightly panicked at the thought of everyone seeing him like this. Haha, don't worry, partner. Drake reassured him. Just then the eye disappeared. It works just like your boosted gear. It's the eye of Draconis, the dragon's star. Awesome. Issei shouted happily, like a child getting a new toy. Eye of Draconis. He shouted again, and the eye reappeared. He continued to do so, making it appear and disappear. In many ways, it really was like a child getting a new toy. Alright, now that I've taken care of Drake, I will give you a present, God interrupted his playtime. What do you mean? Issei asked. Yes, what exactly do you mean? Drake added emphasis. Why hello Drake. It's been a long time. Hissed a voice. Did you miss me? Issei could feel Drake shudder. Zekro. Zekro. Oh, you do remember me. Continued Zekro, how sweet of you. Drake, you still know how to make me blush. Issei was taken aback by the situation. The voice was that of a woman's, but her emphasis and exclamations took a seductive tone. Who is this? Issei thought, and how does Drake know her? I will leave you to be acquainted with each other for now, as I have some business to attend to, God stated. Even beyond the grave I must see to it that my plans will come to fruition. The light from which God's voice had been coming from slowly dimmed and now only the aurora of lights that enveloped the void shone, illuminating Issei and his boosted gear. In the distance, a pendant came to view. It had a large purple jewel in the center of what looked like black scales with golden talons protruding from the center. Its general appearance reminded Issei of Drake's armor, but with different colors. How did you manage to escape? Drake asked, seemingly to no one, as the pendant drew closer and closer. Drake, who is this? Issei asked in his mind, reaching out to his dragon spirit who has been unusually detached from Issei's soul since this pendant came into view. Oh, that, replied Zekro. I managed to bait one of the guards into wearing me around his neck, then I entered his soul and ripped him apart from the inside. She said cheerfully. Then it was a simple job of freezing time, just as the others guards marched in to help their already dead friend, and I was out. She recalled. You know, the usual. Yes, unfortunately I do know, Drake replied stoically. I know enough not to trust you even if the creator himself hands you over on a silver platter. Oh Drake, ever the cynic. I am a changed woman, you know, she chimed. How about you let me show you? She finished seductively as the pendant was now in arm's reach of Issei. Like hell I would, Drake began to retort. Who are you? Issei interrupted impatiently. Oh, where are my manners? She chuckled. The name's Zekro, dear boy. The gravity dragon. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Issei Haidu. Wait, you're a dragon. And more importantly, how do you know who I am? I make it a point that I know each and every host my beloved Red Dragon Emperor dwells in, she stated matter-of-factly, that, and God has also told me about you. Filthy stalker, Drake spat. I do more than stalk you, Drake, she replied, taking on a seductive tone once more. I fantasize about you all the time. I want to make those centuries of fantasies come to life. Excuse me, Issei interrupted before things got out of hand, but what do you want? Dialed, it's more of what you want, she answered sternly, dropping the seductive tone. Do you want to be the one to save your precious friends? Well, I am the only way you can possibly be prepared for what's coming. So what am I supposed to do with you? Issei asked as he took the pendant into his hands. Wear you around my neck? No, Drake answered, we have to fuse her to your soul. Oh Drake, you make it sound so hot. Wait, what? Issei almost shouted. Is that even possible? To have two sacred gears, let alone dragon spirits? Ordinarily, no, humans couldn't possibly survive the fusion process because it takes a lot of strength to overcome incompatibility issues, Drake stated. But there won't be any compatibility issues here. How sweet. I'm blushing even more now. Silence, woman. Drake shouted. Partner, we have no choice. If the creator says we'll need her, then that's enough for me to go on. Wait, I don't understand why you two won't have any compatibility issues. Because we used to be lovers, dear boy. What? Issei shouted. Yes, Drake sighed, we used to be lovers. I saw her crash onto the earth as she escaped from two other dragons. I helped her and we fell in love. Brings tears to my eyes every time. Zekro wailed, sobbing as she did. Ugh. Anyway, it turns out the dragons were after her because she was an assassin and had killed their pack leader, Drake continued. I didn't mind, I still loved her. Right up until the moment she tried to kill me in my sleep. Okay, now I'm just confused, Issei muttered. I only did so because Albion forced me to. And at least I pleasured you before trying to. Zekro grew seductive again. Okay, I think I get it, I don't need to hear the rest right now, Issei interrupted. All I need to know is, will I survive? Yes. Yes, my dear. Then that's all I really need. Do it. Bright flashes consumed the surroundings as the fusion began. The lights danced with colors of green, purple and gold as the auroras around them paled in comparison. Once the flashes stopped, Issei gasped. On his left arm was Drake, the Red Dragon Emperor. On his right was Zekro, the Gravity Dragon. Both grew to his upper arm, with 2 green jewels on Drake's crimson plating and 2 purple jewels on Zekro's black plating. Golden talons poked out of each gauntlet at various places and he could feel them fuse inside with his soul. Drake, stop it. Zekro squealed in laughter, slurring with seduction towards the end. You wish I were doing something to you, vile beast. Came the quick retort. Well, this is going to be interesting, Issei muttered. Indeed, it will, God's voice and light reappeared, I am certain they will lead you on the correct path. Now then, Issei, he proclaimed as his hand reached out of the light. His hand was, well, massive. It could not even be compared to Issei's body. Even if viewed from a distance where Issei was just a dot, the hand would still be too massive to fit into view. It looked as though God could mold a new world with that hand. Which he did. But Issei was more concerned with how easy it would be for him to crush said world. You need to train. But I am afraid I can no longer hold your existence here with the combined energy of both your gears. I will have to make a quick shortcut and pour years of knowledge and experience into your mind. Your body will also mature with the same amount of time, but you will not lose your age, so don't worry, God told him. Your body will accept Drake and Zekro's strength and intelligence, and you will be tougher than you ever have before. Are you ready? Issei took a moment, taking it all in. Yes, I am ready. The twister of light burst out of God's hand and enveloped Issei. They twirled around him in high speeds, forming a tornado with Issei at its center. They finally dispersed after a few moments and revealed Issei with a slightly buffer body, slightly longer hair, and his eyes glowed with power. I feel like I can take on the universe. Was his first thought. Watch it, boy, don't go power hungry on me now, God warned. Issei snapped his attention toward his creator, annoyance in his eyes. He almost made the huge mistake of talking back to him before Drake interrupted him. Don't be stupid, partner. Issei relaxed, eased his muscles, and unclenched his fists that he had subconsciously made. Issei smiled. Thank you, God, for all of this. That's better. Now, I will give you the choice, and choose wisely now, God began, choose which time you want to be transported back to. Go for it, partner. You and I both know what you're going to say, Drake teased. Drake, dear, let the boy make his own decision. Zekro rebuked. Have you chosen? God asked after a few moments. Yes. I have, came Issei's reply. What now? Think on what you were doing at that time as I begin the process, God instructed. Try to imagine you were still there. Issei closed his eyes as he remembered. God reached out his hand. It was at sunset, standing at an overpass was a teenage boy muttering to himself. Cars passed under him as he continued his tirade of self-pity. Ugh, being a teenager's the worst. God's hand was now cradling the space in which Issei floated upon its palm. At this rate, jerking off to porn is the closest I'll ever get to doing it before I go off to college, which means I'll be a virgin forever and die alone. Muttered the boy to himself. He closed his eyes and let his head drop from his hands and softly leaned against the railing of the overpass. God swiftly closed his hand and seemingly crushed Issei in his fist. The boy heard light and soft footsteps approaching him, but he thought it was just some other random pedestrian and didn't bother looking up. Let them see me and feel bad for me, he thought to himself. God unclenched his fist and Issei had disappeared. Excuse me, she began, you're Issei Haidu from Kuo Academy, right? Or am I wrong? Excuse me, she began, you're Issei Haidu from Kuo Academy, right? Or am I wrong? Issei stiffened. Are you okay? She asked. Partner? Drake asked mentally. Zekro, freeze her for me, Issei thought. Anything for you, my dear, came Zekro's reply. The space around the girl slightly distorted and in an instant she was frozen in time. Zekro also froze her thoughts, and so in this state the girl is technically dead. Issei looked up at her, a single tear escaping his eye and dripping onto his uniform. He slightly winced at the sight of her in her uniform, looking all sweet and innocent. If he didn't know any better he would have fallen for her in that moment. Issei looked away, fighting back the urge to stare at her more. But, alas, his body moved with a mind of its own and Issei walked toward her slowly. It worked, Issei thought. He was really back in time. He checked his phone for the date nearing the spring semester of his sophomore year at Kuo Academy. He looked upwards and whispered, thank you. He reverted his attention to the girl in front of him. She was slightly smaller than him, with long black hair reaching her waist. She was wearing a red dress uniform and a skirt from another school, and was carrying a brown briefcase with both hands in front of her, arms tucked underneath her breasts, making them bulge. And my god, those brie. Ahem. Right, sorry, he shook his head. He needed to refrain from thinking perverted thoughts. Her violet eyes were staring right at him, making him shudder slightly. Her head was slightly tilted to the side, her bangs hanging over her left eye, covering it. She looked so cute. It was so dangerously deceptive that she looked almost genuinely cute. Issei couldn't help but get closer to her. He was now a foot away from her, his feet having stopped dead in their tracks. He managed to make out. He cleared his throat. I love. What are you doing? Drake asked audibly as he appeared on Issei's left arm. Hush. Hissed Zekro as she appeared on Issei's right arm. Let him finish. You know she can't hear you, right? Drake. Let the boy say his piece. Both of you shut up, Issei said sternly. But. Now, Drake. Both sacred gears dematerialized in green and purple flashes, leaving Issei's arms free of their burdens. He brought up his right hand and lightly cupped the girl's left cheek. Tears were now flowing from his eyes, unable to hold them back any longer. He cleared his throat once more and continued, I loved you. Issei felt as if an entire building was lifted from his chest. I sincerely loved you. You were my first girlfriend, my first date, and my first love, he proclaimed to her. Her eyes simply stared back into his crying ones. But you were just tricking me, fooling me into believing that I could finally experience love. In the end you were just manipulating me, Issei whined. But I still love you. He shouted, closing his eyes and tilting his head down. I love you. And I'll do whatever it takes to make you feel the same. Issei leant onto her frozen body, his arms on her shoulder, as he cried his eyes out in front of her. His tears were creating a small puddle beneath him. Once he could no longer cry, he looked up. Her eyes, those violet eyes, stared right back at him. He released her and slowly backed away to where he was before and assumed the position he was in. Zekro. She didn't bother replying, she already knew what he wanted her to do. After all, they shared the same mind. With a slight twitch of his right ring finger, the space around Raynare distorted once more and she was freed from her temporary death. You're Issei, right? Raynare or Yuma in this case, asked shyly. Issei looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers once again. Yeah, he finally replied before standing up straight. Is there something I can help you with? She began, stumbling out of embarrassment. I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Issei's heart dropped. She's really good at acting, he thought. Are you seeing anyone right now? She finally asked in that sweet voice. Here goes nothing, Issei thought. Now? No, why? He answered her. That's wonderful. She quickly chimed. In that case, since you're single, do you think you'd like to go out with me? Issei swallowed hard. I've been watching, you pass by here low. Yes, he interrupted her. Uma quickly looked at him, shock in her expression. "What?" she asked sheepishly. "I mean, yes, I'd like to go out with you," he explained. "I've always wanted a girlfriend and you're really cute," he continued, making her blush slightly. Partner Drake pleaded mentally. "Really?" she asked excitedly. "In that case, I want you to be my boyfriend." Shortly after their conversation, they agreed to meet up at the same spot the next morning so they can walk together for a while before having to part ways again and head toward their schools. Having said their goodbyes, they went their separate ways and Issei was now walking home alone in the evening sky. The moon had not quite showed up yet and Issei was relying on the streetlights to illuminate his path. He had been walking quietly for quite some time, but unfortunately his mind was filled with voices arguing over what he had done. And not only that, she tried to kill Asia Argento as well. But love creates second chances for everyone. You'd be surprised how much a little love can change someone's heart, be it angel, fallen, or devil. But she doesn't love him. Issei stopped walking. Watch it Drake, he thought. Fine, sorry, but doesn't make it any less true. Drake. She doesn't love you and you know that she is just playing you. Well then let her. Issei shouted audibly, causing people around him to keep their distance from him, thinking he was crazy. He might as well have been at this point. "I appreciate your concerns for me and my well-being, but this is my decision and it's final," declared Issei. "Now, I don't want to hear about this again." Fine. The next morning Issei woke up slightly disappointed. He was used to waking up with 3 or 4 girls sleeping next to him naked. Not because he was perverted, but because he just missed them. And last night, when he entered his house and saw his parents, he dropped onto his knees and started tearing up right there at the doorway. Once his parents noticed him, they came to his side and asked if he was okay. They asked if he had seen another skirt fly up because of the breeze, since that was the only other time Issei had cried at the door like that. He hugged them tight and told them he would do his best. Though confused, his parents just hugged him back. He had spent the night listening to the 2 dragons that were now inside him argue. Zekro insisted on sleeping with Drake, and Drake insisted that she could do so over his dead body. They continued their banter well into the early hours of the morning before Issei finally had enough and said that he would kill himself if they continued. Issei checked the time. 5:47 in the morn. Damn, he thought. I need to get rid of this alarm clock. He picked up the perverted alarm clock and threw it in a box under his bed. Damn, I need to get rid of these, he thought as he realized just how perverted he used to be when he saw all the posters, pin-ups, magazines, manga, erotic games, and hentai that was in his room. After cleaning up he proceeded to freshen up in the bathroom. Everything was peaceful as he showered when a certain someone decided to wake up. "Oh my, it really is true," Zekro chimed. Issei almost jumped at the sound of her voice in his head. "Oh right, sorry, forgot there was a female in my head now. Believe me boy, I'm not one to shy away from prizes of this magnitude," she seduced. "What are you saying?" asked a panicked Issei. "And what do you mean it really is true?" "She's referring to the myth of the hosts I've inhabited throughout the millennia," stated Drake, having just woken up. "And what might that myth be?" "But their assets reflected those of the Red Dragon Emperor, yours truly." "I don't understand," Issei began to think, confused. "It means your beep has the same ratio as his, dear," Zekro answered seductively. Issei almost died from blood loss as his nose bled into his bath. After a few more minutes of putting on clothes and getting ready for school, Issei was out of the door. He packed his breakfast because he was running late due to circumstances during his bath. He gave his parents a swift goodbye before running towards the overpass. And all the while, 2 dragons were fighting over the thought of Issei being late because of a myth. He reached the overpass just 5 minutes late from their arranged meeting. She was there, leaning on the railing, waiting for Issei. She didn't look like the innocent and sweet girl that she pretended to be. In that moment she looked annoyed and bored, leaning onto the railing. When she noticed Issei she put on her best smile and exclaimed good morning. As she ran to him and greeted him. "Hey, Uma, sorry I ran into some problems," Issei apologized, scratching the back of his head as he did so. "It's okay," she said cheerfully. "Wanna get going?" As they walked, she talked on and on about anything that she saw, be it the butterflies hovering over the wet grass or the lovely elderly couple sipping coffee together on their porch bench. She looked so sweet, so innocent, so lovely, like a little girl walking through the street. God help me, Issei thought. And no, I'm not saying that in vain. "And that tree over there is where I crashed on my first bike ride." She giggled. "I never really learned to ride the bike properly, I don't know why." "You never had to," Issei thought, "after all, you can fly." Issei smiled, patting himself on the back for still being able to recognize her for what and who she is. "I'm sure you just need a little more practice," Issei attempted to engage in conversation. "I myself crashed more than a few times back when I was learning." She chuckled and smiled brightly. "That's probably because you couldn't see through those gigantic bangs of yours." she teased. Hey, now, I happen to like my hair. He retorted. At least I don't have to worry about mine getting tangled in the wheels. He teased back, making her pout. Wait. It's happening again. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop it. Issei looked downcast as he continued walking, slightly falling behind from Yuma. Issei, are you okay? She asked, sounding worried. Was it something I said? Oh, I'm sorry for whatever it is and I hope I can make it up to you. She exclaimed, bowing her head in sincerity. She should have tried to become a professional actress, he thought. He lightly sighed, he didn't like what he was about to do. Yuma, he began, do you really like me? Yuma took a step back as she gasped and placed her hand on her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Issei's heart dropped. Of course the answer was no, and he knew that. In fact he shouldn't have even. Yuma ran forward and almost tackled Issei, hugging him as she wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his chest. If he had been the old Issei he would have slammed onto the pavement, but being a little stronger he managed to balance himself as he carried her weight. Oh of course I do. Came her reply. You're my boyfriend, after all. Partner Drake began. I know, Drake. I can feel it too, he stopped him. She's lying. After a few more blocks they had to part ways, with Yuma heading toward her school and Issei heading towards Kuo Academy. But right before they reached the crossing, they ran into Mitsuda and Motohama, who could not express their disbelief more than a few words. You betrayed us. Wailed Mitsuda. Traitor. Whined Motohama. Tears streamed down their faces in a most pathetic manner as Yuma and Issei approached. But instead of taunting them like Yuma was expecting Issei to do, he ran forward and hugged both of them hard. I missed you perverts. He shouted. And we missed you, but who is this broad? Asked Mitsuda, slightly struggling under the weight of Issei draped around his neck. Yeah, and since when did you work out? Queried Motohama, his ability to size up women also came in handy as he examined Issei's slightly buffer body. Issei paid no attention to their questions and simply clung onto them longer. Oh you remarkable idiots, he began as he let go and joined Yuma by her side. Since you won't remember any of this anyway, her name doesn't matter. She's my cousin from Tokyo, he lied. The pervert stared at Issei questionably, disliking their friend's vagueness. Since when did you have a smoking hot cousin from Tokyo? They asked. Yuma herself raised an eyebrow at Issei. What did you mean by you won't remember any of this? Issei simply chuckled and grabbed Yuma's hand, making her slightly gasp and blush lightly. Mitsuda broke into tears again, slamming onto the ground on his knees. Motohama simply fainted backwards and hit the ground with a loud thump. Issei led Yuma in between the perverts and continued their walk for about another block without speaking, simply holding her hand in his. Once he reached Kuo Academy, Issei tensed. All around him he could feel strong energies, some more than others. He whispered, Eye of Draconis, and his right eye morphed into its alternate form. He quickly covered it with his right hand, permitting only a slit in his fingers to see through. This won't do, he thought, and ran towards a nearby tree with a couple sitting under it. Excuse me, the guy began. You're excused, now scram, Issei quickly dismissed them. The couple did walk away, deciding not to let Issei ruin their mood. Issei leaned against the tree with his right shoulder, bringing up his right hand to play with his bangs, as he also leant his head to the tree. He did an okay job of hiding his eye as he surveyed the area. He shut his left eye, and everything turned greenish-orange. His pupil dilated, and now only faint silhouettes of a few people could be made out. He strained his eye and focused on those silhouettes. There they were. The first he could recognize was Kiba. He was being crowded by some girls asking for his email, to which Kiba only smiled and rejected them. How many hearts has this guy broken? Issei thought. Just when one girl was about to tear up, Kiba touched her lightly on the shoulder and told her to cheer up, that they could always be friends. He gave her a bright smile, that Kiba smile, and the girl instantly lit up with joy. Damn, who would have thought that the Excalibur survivor would be the player of the century? He then recognized a smaller figure all alone at the back of a building, sitting at the stairs. Kaneko was eating a bag of sweets with one hand as she read from a book with the other. Other freshmen attempted to talk to her, to which Kaneko simply showed away with her snack-eating hand. Issei chuckled, Kaneko was always one to reject company if she had no interest in them. He refocused on two other signatures. They were constantly together, as well as followed by what seemed like 6 or 7 other weaker presences. It was Sona and her queen Tsubaki, followed by what Issei reasoned was none other than Saji. They were speaking of Ria's engagement to Riser Phoenix and how Ria's was doomed to marry. Issei began to search for Ria's. He finally fixated onto 2 strong presences in the hallways of the juniors' classes. He recognized the two as Akeno and Ria's. Akeno was talking about her newest chess strategy and how Ria's was in for a big one, to which Ria's only scoffed and told her to bring her A game. How he missed her eyes, her hair, her laugh. It's as if time slowed down as he watched her, beholding her beauty once more. Her voice was as smooth as honey as she spoke, tickling Issei's ears as he let his thoughts focus on her. Just then Ria stopped dead in her tracks, tugging on Akeno's shirt sleeve. For a few moments Ria simply stared at the ground while Akeno had a confused expression plastered on her face before both looked up directly at Issei. He was a little shocked. It was as if they could see him there, watching them. Here he focused on Kiba, who was now doing the same, staring at Issei, ignoring the annoyed girls trying to catch his attention. Issei spotted Sona and Tsubaki do the same, but her peerage was preoccupied. Lastly here he focused on Wait. Kaneko was gone, her bag of sweets now on the floor, spilling its contents, and her book was on the floor as well. Issei searched frantically for. "Who are you?" came a stern voice. Issei almost jumped in horror as Kaneko was now directly in front of him. He didn't see her because she was short enough to duck under his eyes. Issei quickly dismissed the eye of Draconus as he struggled to find an excuse. I'm Issei Haidu, he stammered, I'm a sophomore here and I was just lost. I know who you are, Kaneko interrupted with her usual monotone voice. Ria's told me to investigate on you beforehand. But I asked you who you were. Issei took a step back. Kaneko took 2 steps forward. Issei, panicked, started running towards his building. Kaneko reached for his collar but decided not to scare him away any further. She returned to her sweets and her book while everyone laughed at the running pervert. During the day Issei got a few visits from people he once called friends. Kiba was the first, entering Issei's classroom, making all the girls squeal in excitement. They were all crowding him until he shouted Issei. Issei Haidu. Over the chorus of girls asking for his email. Then all the girls, like clockwork, turned to Issei with pure rage and evil in their eyes. If looks could kill, Issei was sure he would have ended up as grains of sand in the river Styx 1. Issei quickly ran out of the death trap of a classroom and hid on the roof. After a few minutes of peace, Issei felt a very powerful presence rising fast from below. He ran towards the edge and was about to peer over, just as Akeno flew past him, making Issei stagger back. Akeno hit her wings once more and said, Ara, I wanted to see the powerful presence myself, she began in her usually playful tone. Issei simply dashed toward the door, but before he could, Kaneko stood at the doorway, munching on some sweets she had in her pocket. Issei jumped off the edge of the building in a panicked frenzy. Akeno and Kaneko ran to try and save him, but they were surprised to see Issei standing there, waiting for them as they peered over the edge. Except Issei was standing horizontally on the wall of the building. He jumped over their heads, landed behind them, smirked, and then ran out the door again. Who is this guy, was all that Kaneko could say. Towards the end of the day Issei was called to the student council room, but he decided to skip out by blending with the crowd as everyone rushed to exit the school. Just when Issei thought he was home free as he crossed the school gate, a voice made him freeze. I won't ask again. Who are you and what did you do to the boy who used to reside in that body? Issei turned slowly, eyes staring at the floor. He looked up and his hazel gaze was met by blue-green ones, sternly overpowering him. Ria stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed under her breasts. Was all that Issei could say before he slowly started to walk backwards. I don't know what you're talking about. Issei shouted as he began to run at full speed away from Ria's, who shouted in annoyance. You cannot escape us forever, Issei Haidu. Believe me, he thought as he ran, I don't intend to. It was time. Issei was standing in the middle of an intersection, leaning onto a statue. What am I going to do? He thought. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice. Here, take a flyer, said a woman who was dressed in some form of outfit. She handed him a flyer with a magic circle in the center and the top read, your wish will be granted. He smiled. He recalled pedaling his bike up and down hills for miles to fulfill the promise on said flyers. Eventually, Yuma arrived and they began their date. Issei took her shopping and he bought her a pink bracelet. Then he took her to his favorite ice cream bar and Issei tried very hard to refrain from focusing on her generous bust. Then they took a walk around the park and were approaching the fountain at its center just as sunset began to start. Partner, what's the plan? She seems to have warmed up to you a little, maybe try confessing. Issei paid no attention to the voices in his head. He already knew what he was going to do. His hand slightly brushed against hers and he took her hand in his. Yuma slightly blushed as she bowed her head down and stared at the ground, though she didn't retract her hand. Just as they reached the fountain, she ran forward and stopped, facing Issei with her back towards the fountain. Here goes nothing, Issei thought as he sighed. Can I ask you a question? She began. Issei tensed his legs. In honor of our first date, there's something I'd like you to do to commemorate this special moment. Issei stiffened his back. Sure, anything at all, Issei responded to the girl who was now bowing before him, her eyes closed. She smirked. She looked up slightly and opened her eyes. Would you Issei interrupted her as he lunged forward, grabbed her by the shoulders, and planted his lips on hers. The night before, 23:57. I must say, I wasn't expecting you, Issei said warmly, not yet, at least. He was lying on his bed, struggling to fall asleep during the calm times between Drake and Zekro's arguments. Before he could, he felt a very and I mean very powerful presence approach his household, and it eventually made its way into Issei's room. Issei opened one eye, searching his room for whoever it was that chose to investigate him tonight. The night before, Kaneko had been watching over him, eating sweets and reading books on the roof of the house across the street. He had managed to draw her away by using Zekro's mirror image ability and created an illusion of Issei, which he sent to dash out the window and lead Kaneko on a wild goose chase. But he had a feeling this time it would be different. The presence had gotten into his room. He wasn't sure who it was or what they wanted, but it sure as hell wasn't one of Ria's peerage. Maybe Sona's. Issei thought, no, they are far too weak to exert this much power, let alone try to hide it. He had noticed that the entity was using some form of cloaking seal, trying to hide as much of its power as it could, probably in hopes of sneaking in stealthily. Something caught Issei's eye. He squinted as he tried to figure out what it was. What looked like a golden comb was floating in the air. No, not a comb, it was. Azazel, Issei muttered as he closed his eye, relaxing a bit. The figure emerged from the shadows, proving Issei right. Ah, so you did notice me, after all, Azazel started, taking on his trademark casual tone, but how would you, a seemingly normal and extremely perverted sophomore only 2 days ago, detect a presence such as mine, even if I've spent centuries mastering the art of stealth? He asked, almost rhetorically judging by his slight slur. Lucky guess, Issei spat as he turned on his bed and directed his back at his previous mentor. Now, please, leave. I'm going to need my rest for tomorrow. Oh, you mean for your date with my pretty little Raynare? Azazel smiled as he felt Issei tense slightly. Or should I say, Yuma, he chuckled, enjoying teasing the boy. Save your breath, she's just playing you so she can. Fill me, at the end of the date, Issei finished for him. And it's sunset, hence her name, Yuma. Azazel's smile gave way to an unusually serious expression on his face. And how did you manage to just guess that, he questioned in a stern voice. Issei sighed as he sat up and rested on the side of his bed, his feet resting on the cold wooden floor of his room. He stared into Azazel's eyes, engaging in a battle between Hazel and Violet. After a few minutes of pin-drop silence, Issei slightly smiled. As hard as it is to admit, he began in a tone completely unfit for the level of tension in the room, even if I absolutely hate your guts sometimes, I kind of missed you too, Azazel. Azazel smiled back warmly. There are only 2 ways one can travel back in time, but seeing as how I watched one die and helped kill the other, how did you manage that? He questioned. Issei managed a small laugh. I have no idea what you're talking about, he replied. But I can assure you that you still have a lot to learn about these. In an instant, bright flashes of green and purple covered Issei's arms, making Azazel slightly lean back on his seat. The light dispersed shortly and revealed Issei's pair in more ways than one of sacred gears. Azazel lit up like a little child on Christmas Day, and in a brief blur, he ended up kneeling in front of Issei. May I? He asked giddily, to which Issei smirked and nodded. Azazel ran his hands all up and down Drake's red scales, golden talons, and emerald jewels. Watch the merchandise, Drake warned, almost making Azazel squeal in joy. Soon after Azazel's figure blurred once more and he ended up sitting beside Issei on his bed, hands now caressing Zekro's black scales and purple jewels. Don't get carried away now, Zekro cooed, seducing the excited fallen angel. After a few more minutes of Azazel gawking over the 2 sacred gears, Issei yawned. Don't forget about this, he yawned as he unveiled the Eye of Draconus in a green flash. And after a few more minutes of Azazel nearly kissing Issei as he inspected his eye, he retreated and sat back down on his chair, once again sitting across the wielder of the sacred gear. Well, I certainly wasn't expecting this when Barakiel warned me of a sacred gear host awakening in this town, he began, and I certainly wasn't expect said host to have not 1, but 2 of said sacred gears. He leaned forward slightly, and I certainly wasn't expecting said sacred gears to be none other than the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear and the Black-Winged Assassin's gravity gauntlet, he remarked. He leaned forward even more, tilting his head, so his mouth was now a hair's breadth away from Issei's ear. And I certainly wasn't expecting said host to have not only eluded us for 17 years, but also managed to wind up on the radar of my little renegade squadron of fallen angels, he whispered. And not only that, but somehow land a date with my most deceptive student, knowing she was going to kill him anyways. Azazel leaned back into his chair as Issei simply stared at him, eyes half open from fatigue. Well, sounds to me like you're not very certain of a lot of things nowadays, Issei mocked, making Azazel smirk. But you left out the part where I traveled through time. Oh, yeah, Azazel scratched his jaw, yeah, that too. Issei chuckled. He dismissed his toys and stood up, looking down at his guest. Since you're here, and since you were sort of my mentor before, I feel like I should tell you the whole story, he told him. Azazel leaned back, getting comfortable for the coming story when Issei interrupted him, over a cup of tea, of course. You are still a guest in my house after all, even if you did sneak in. And so the sacred gear addict and the withdrawing pervert went downstairs and sat on opposite ends of the dining table. Issei began to serve tea for them both as he recounted the events that led up to his death, starting with a certain girl he met at an overpass. Present time. Riaz was sitting at her desk in the occult research clubroom as she shifted in her seat, anxiously waiting for her summon. And are you sure he pocketed it? She asked the figure before her. The woman was the same one who handed Issei a flyer earlier today, at around 9:49. Yes, he even smirked as he read the top. Very well, you're dismissed, Riaz replied, all the while still staring out the window to her right. The sun's going down already, she thought. Maybe he didn't make it after all. Kaneko, she suddenly snapped, but not letting her eyes leave the orange view at the window. Kaneko, in a similar fashion, did not bother looking up from the book she was reading. Like I said, he left his house at 8:32 exactly and reached the statue at around 9:24, just 6 minutes before the agreed upon meetup, she reported. Tiba. Tiba uncrossed his arms as he stood up casually, leaving his beloved leaning position at the wall. After that they went to the shopping mall nearby and started browsing through a couple of dress stores, having the girl try a few of them on, he recalled. Then they ended up at a jewelry store at 11:07 and he bought her a pink bracelet. Ria sighed. Akeno. My turn already? Akeno chimed as she set down the tea she was drinking onto the coffee table. Well, once they left the mall, they started headed towards this cute little ice cream parlor and had their lunch as well as an hour or two of dessert as they just talked. She hesitated as she blushed slightly. It was quite sweet actually. I grew a little jealous. She smiled. And was that around the time when you lost them? Riaz asked, annoyed. Don't be like that. Akeno pouted. I tried my best, but I got the feeling that they were starting to notice me, so I decided to keep a little more distance between myself and them. But once they rounded a corner, they were gone. She explained. Riaz stared thoughtfully at the now reddish-orange sky. Something's wrong, she thought to herself. She stood from her desk and walked toward the window, opening it and letting the breeze come in, much to Kaneko's annoyance, as the pages on her book started flapping uncontrollably. But the red-haired heir to the Gremory clan had her thoughts focused on one thing and one thing only. What was that power? She thought as she closed her eyes and recalled. 2 days earlier? Who was that boy? She asked. Akeno was standing behind the couch her master were currently sitting on. They were engaging in a game of chess, although some of the pieces were glowing red. What boy? She asked back. The kid who was sitting in the middle. Well, Akeno tried to remember, I think he's in class 2B. If I remember right, his name's Issei Haidu, she recalled. She shifted her gaze back at Riaz. Why? She asked, what makes you ask about him? She pushed. Oh, nothing, Riaz lied. I just wondered if you knew who he was, that's all. Riaz made a move on the chessboard, using her pawn to corner Akeno's king. Checkmate, she proclaimed, beating her best friend once again as she stood up from the couch. Akeno whined as she bent over the board, confirming her loss. Your trap was very easy to see through, Riaz remarked as she began to undress. Sorry, I did my best to make it harder on you, Akeno responded. Thanks, I look forward to next time, she replied, draping her clothes onto the couch. She got down to her underwear and slid that off and placed it with her other clothes, then she stepped into the shower and turned on the hot water. As she let the warm water cover her body, she couldn't help but wonder. What was it about him that I sensed? She asked herself. She has not noticed the boy for his particularly average looks, or his slightly geeky voice, or his reputation as one of the biggest perverts on campus. No, she had sensed something completely different from him. Could it be? She suddenly thought as her eyes opened. Akeno, she beckoned. Yes, Riaz, came the reply. Ask Kaneko to follow that boy, I'm afraid we've overlooked something. But Riaz, Kaneko is on her summons. This is not up for debate. Do whatever it takes. Yes, master. Let's hope no one else has noticed, she thought. Present day. Riaz sighed. Looking back at it now, she realized what she really found interesting in his aura. It wasn't even his power. It was the way he seemed completely oblivious to it. He seemed as though he knew nothing about his aura or the supernatural for that matter, as he just sloppily sat next to a building full of powerful devils without even flinching. And when she came to look at what was disturbing her thoughts, he looked right back at her. Those hazel eyes, that goofy looking yet well-kept hair, and that expression of pure wonder as he stared back into her eyes. She had almost lost herself in her thoughts when the two perverts next to him started ogling her bust. She couldn't care less, but decided against making herself seem easy. But she had honestly hoped that she would get to see him more, maybe even talk to him. It was the beginnings of a very deep, intimate, and secret crush. Her thoughts were broken by the sound of Akeno giggling. Ara, Riaz, you're blushing. Let's just hope he uses the flyer, she finally spoke. The universe shuddered as she narrowed her eyes. I don't know what exactly he just did, she thought, but I get the feeling that I should know. She frowned. Volley, she muttered under her breath, and a wormhole appeared behind her, and a young man with silver hair stepped into the room, if you could even call it that. It was comprised of 4 walls, a floor and no roof, forming a nice little square with nothing but a few toys scattered around. The girl was currently lying down on her belly, resting her chin on her 2 hands as she flailed her legs in the air playfully behind her. It would have been the perfect image for a little girl if it weren't for her cloths, which were made up of nothing but a few pieces of cloth and leather, and her stern, almost frighteningly serious expression. You called? Volley asked, exhaling an annoyance as he did so. What is he doing? She asked, pointing at the corner of the room she was facing. Volley peered over the girl sprawled on the floor to look through the wormhole she was using as a makeshift television set, watching what seemed to be. They're kissing, he responded. Or, rather, he's kissing her. The girl didn't flinch. What's kissing? She wondered. Something squirmed in the bushes near the fountain. Ooh, Mitsuda softly wailed. It can't be true. Motohama whined. M&M had seen the couple while they were strolling through the mall, and the two decided to lay aside their erotic game browsing to follow the couple. They watched in horror as their best friend went on his very first date, jealousy boiling inside their stomachs. They observed them browse through dresses and shirts for each other, laughing and having a genuinely good time together, which only made Motohama want to vomit even more as Mitsuda already was. Then they followed them to a jewelry store, and M&M attempted to catch Issei's attention by waving around like a pair of idiots outside the shop, hoping their friend would see them through the shop window. But alas, Issei was too focused on having a good time with his girlfriend. They watched as he tenderly took her fingers in his and brought them up to his chest, making her blush. M&M were sure that Issei would pounce on her then and there in the dressing rooms, but instead he held onto her hand with his own, while his other hand reached for a pink bracelet on display on the counter next to them. He spread it slightly with his fingers before he carefully placed it onto her wrist, making her blush grow a deeper shade. She abruptly retracted her hand as she faced away from him and faced directly where M&M were. They ran to the side, and thankfully she didn't seem to notice them. But they noticed her. On her face, where they expected surprise and shyness to be, was an expression of pure hate and disgust. She looked like she was holding back her vomit. But just as quick as she turned, she changed her expression to that of sweetness and gratitude, showing off how the bracelet looked on her as she twirled around and smiled warmly at Issei, to which he just nodded in approval and bought it on the spot. The girl Issei never told M&M her name actually looked shocked, thanking Issei for the gift. Mitsuda's mouth twitched. Motohama's eyes narrowed. She's playing him, they said in unison. After that, they followed Issei and his date to their favorite ice cream parlor, and they sat outside in the parking lot, watching closely as Issei's date started drinking her soda float and happily burying her mouth into the whipped cream on the top as Issei drank his in a slightly calmer method. Once she was done with the whipped cream, she bounced back on her seat, giving out a giggle of joy as she loved how it tasted. As she did, one of the buttons on her shirt popped open, revealing her bust generously, making M&M get a nosebleed. Issei himself blushed a bit but couldn't resist staring for a few moments as the girl resumed drinking her soda from her straw. She noticed him getting so flustered, and when Issei had come to his senses, he quickly looked away and sipped on his straw rapidly in embarrassment, making him cough out from the cold soda. The girl offered him a towel as he did so. It sickens me how deceptive she is, hissed Motohama. Yeah, Brosif, agreed Mitsuda, definitely some sort of gold digger. But Issei's not even that rich or that smart either, Motohama remarked. Then what could she be after? We'll just have to wait and see. With that, the two resumed stalking their prey. They followed them as they walked through the park, going around in circles as they just talked. It was amazing seeing their normally perverted best friend be so smooth and confident around such a beautiful girl. But they tried not to start shipping them as a couple, no matter how cute they looked together, because they knew the truth, and the truth was that the girl was a deceptive bitch. And now, they were in the bushes of the park, the sun setting behind them as they watched Issei make a bold move and hold her hand in his. Sure, this is probably the 3rd time he's done so, but this is the first time he has without any motive, just wanting to feel her close to him. M&M, having spent around 8 hours following the couple, thought that they would just give up and head home, when the girl suddenly ran forward leaving Issei where he stood as they reached the fountain. They could faintly hear her talk for a bit and Issei agreeing to something. Then as she was about to say something, Their best friend leaned in and kissed her, arms on her shoulders. M broke down in tears on the spot. Fuck, she thought, what now? She had been prepared for everything, or at least, she thought she was. Even if he suddenly declared he was gay, she had a plan. She had thought of every step, every spot where they would go, and the perfect time to do it, when no one was around. She was ready. But not for this. She slightly squirmed under the new weight she was now balancing against. She wasn't exactly in a comfortable position when he did it, she wished he had warned her or something before. Wait, why haven't I done anything about it? She thought to herself. She knew she had to act. This was her target, after all. That, and she was already in love with someone else. Her mind was racing to get her muscles to push him back or for her to pull away. But nothing happened, she just let him. She could feel her lips give in, going with his smooth ones and dancing along with his liquid motions. Her knees felt weak, her breasts seemed heavy. She could feel her back relax and lean into it. Her shoulders, where he was holding her, drooped down lightly, prompting him to pull her closer to him even more. She moaned slightly into the kiss, letting him envelope her in his arms as they reached around and hugged her around her waist. She was tilting her head upwards and to the left as she brought up her arms to his chest and leaned on him lightly, but judging by his muscles, she thought that he barely even cared. After a few more seconds she decided. I don't care anymore, she thought as she deepened the kiss from her end. I'll just enjoy this while I can. It is my first kiss, after all. She let her tongue graze his lower lip softly as she crossed the point of no return. He reciprocated with his tongue and they danced together in between their mouths. He started pushing in deeper, surprising her, as she had heard that he was a virgin and was perversely shy around girls. She reluctantly let him in and he touched and felt every inch of her mouth. She moaned at the sensation of his tongue, closing her eyes to let every touch send shivers down her spine. Eventually she decided it was her turn. She strengthened her knees and got onto her toes, her hands now firmly gripping onto his shirt on his chest. She fought his tongue back with her own and swiftly entered his mouth. He tasted like water with a touch of honey, mildly sweet. He moaned slightly, making her moan as well. Her tongue explored his mouth with a resolve, making him smile slightly at her forcefulness. She tried reaching as far back into his mouth as possible before he suddenly removed his hands from behind her and she felt one go up to her nape and grip her tightly, making her gasp. His other hand snaked down her side and rested just above her posterior. She pulled away and looked into his eyes, her violet ones matching his hazel gaze. They looked longingly at each other for a few moments before his arms contracted, crashing her lips into his, locking them in another kiss. She moaned at his forwardness, his confidence, and especially his skill. He was much better than she could ever have imagined he would be. Their tongues danced around each other for a few more minutes, as if they had both forgotten the world they were in for that brief moment, or at least that's what they thought. In truth, they had been kissing for the past half hour. She pulled away, leaving a thick saliva trail between their lips, and blushed a deep shade of red as she buried her face in his strong chest, breathing heavily as she tried to catch her breath. Her breasts felt like weights, and she could feel her legs give way to a moist feeling. Why can't I stop? She yelled to herself in her head. Her eyes started to close as she rose and fell with each of his breaths. It felt so calming to breathe in unison with someone so close to her. No, I can't, she tried to protest to herself. The reddish-orange light started dancing away as darkness fell upon the couple. In a few moments her mind gave in, letting her eyes slowly start to shut as she drifted off too. Hey, he lightly shook her as she leaned on him. Don't fall asleep on me, Raynare. Her eyes quickly widened once again and she looked up at him. His hazel eyes looked as genuine and sincere as ever, hiding nothing against her as he simply stared deeply into her eyes. Their breathing had returned to normal, but both still looked very flustered as they were blushing heavily. She tilted her head upwards, intending to meet his lips with hers and taste him and feel him again in her. Wait. She suddenly pulled back, escaping his grasp, and swiftly brought her arms up to her chest, feeling a bit shocked at what she just heard him say. Did you just call me Raynare? She almost shouted in surprise. Fuck me, who is this guy? She thought to herself. Issei sighed as he straightened his back. Well, shit, I did, didn't I? He said calmly. No, she muttered, no more games. Who are you? She yelled. Why don't you ask him? He remarked with a small smile, pointing behind her. She quickly spun around at the direction he was pointing and gasped at who she saw sitting there. Nice to see you again, Raynare, Azazel said as he smiled that iconic nonchalant smile. The boy's got some fight in him, he thought. Azazel sat cross-legged on the skirt of the fountain, tilting his head slightly to the side as he enjoyed watching the scene before him unfold. The sunset behind him began to sink into a deeper shade of reddish-orange, bathing the two figures in front of him with the beautiful colors of the sun. The sound of the fountain's constant splash seemed to drown out the entire world, releasing an aura of peace and calm around it. The leaves of the trees surrounding the area rustled softly as the breeze swept in, making Azazel's blonde bangs sway gently as he smiled. The hair of the girl started to sway as well, but because of how long it was and much of it there was, her hair offered a little more resistance and didn't sway as much. Her bangs started to graze the cheek of the boy she was kissing, and with her hands clinging hard onto his shirt, she couldn't do anything about it. The boy's hair also danced with the breeze, but his was flailing about randomly as he never really kept his hair proper. One of his hands was wrapped around the girl's waist, pulling her into him gently. His other hand was currently moving around in circles on her back, massaging her at the base of her shoulders and the arch of her spine, as she gave off an appreciative moan into their kiss. This hand suddenly reached up and ran its fingers through her long and beautiful hair, caressing her head. This prompted the girl to lean in even more, her toes aching from all the weight being put on them. Eventually the girl pulled away, a thick saliva trail stretching between their lips. She blushed heavily and buried her face in the boy's chest. Oh. Azazel suddenly thought. Is she actually embarrassed? He pondered as his smile grew. The girl started to fall asleep as they breathed in unison, his rising and falling chest lulling her to sleep. The boy gently shook her, saying, "Hey, don't fall asleep on me, Raynare." Azazel's smile cracked even wider, his hand covering his mouth as he tried to hold in his laughter. He's in for it now. He thought excitedly. Now things are getting interesting. He watched as the girl drew in for another kiss, before suddenly staggering back and bringing her arms up to her chest, shock creeping into her expression. "Did you just call me Raynare?" she asked, surprise dripping from her voice. The boy fixed his posture as he replied, "Well, shit, I did, didn't I?" As his shoulders drooped down in disappointment. His eyes stared directly at her, piercing into her thoughts and making her hesitate. "No," she muttered. "No more games." "Who are you?" she yelled. For a moment, Azazel's smile faded away. Interesting, he thought to himself. She may be an amazing actress, but I can't help but wonder if she really is hurt. "Why don't you ask him?" the boy replied with a small smile, pointing at Azazel. Azazel sighed. "Here we go," he smirked. The girl turned around and gasped at seeing Azazel sitting there. "Nice to see you again, Raynare," he said, smiling. "Hey Azazel," she stammered. It's not what it looks like," she yelled as she bowed her head in shame. "Oh? Is that so?" he snickered as he stood. "Well then, Raynare, tell me what it does look like." Raynare's eyes widened with panic. She started breaking into a cold sweat, her entire body now quivering at the thought of her love seeing her like this with Issei. Tears started to well in her eyes. It's over, she thought, now he'll never look at me. "Raynare, don't take this too badly, but I never intended to return your feelings," Azazel said sternly. "Even if you plan to do something as reckless as killing this generation Securite." And with those words, Raynare fell to her knees. "Securite?" she gasped. "Impossible. He's just a pervert with a twice critical." "HMPH. You call these a twice critical?" Issei interrupted, manifesting his two gauntlets as well as his dragon eye. "You should really do your homework before you attack a target." Raynare, by this point, was beyond shocked. She simply stared at the ground before her, not knowing how to feel. "He's been tricking me all along?" she questioned herself. "He knew who I was while we were on that date." Her hands started clenching tightly, making her knuckles turn white. She stopped crying and stopped shaking. Her bangs cast a shadow onto her eyes as her expression turned blank. "It seems we've broken her," Azazel remarked. "Why don't we take?" She suddenly stood up and transformed into her true form, a fallen angel. Her two black wings burst from her back and launched herself into the air, looking down at her target with the killing intention of a predator for its prey. But much to her surprise, Issei and Azazel didn't even flinch, they simply looked up at her, as if expecting this reaction from her. With a swift motion she lunged down at Issei, bringing her leg up to kick his face. Issei simply tilted his head to the right, her attack completely missing and leaving her vulnerable at his mercy. He grabbed onto her leg and swung her like a baseball bat, sending her flying towards the fountain where Azazel sat. Azazel blurred as he appeared on a bench not too far away, dodging Raynare as she hit the fountain with a loud thump, crushing the delicate concrete of the fountain. Before the dust cloud that formed settled, she lunged forward again, trying not to focus on the pain that last attack gave her. She formed a red light spear in her hand as she dashed forward, aiming it at Issei's heart. The latter just gave her wide grin as he blurred. Raynare landed where Issei was standing mere nanoseconds ago, light spear piercing nothing but thin air. Her eyes widened and her jaw dropped as she realized that he had dodged her in the blink of an eye. She looked about rapidly, searching for her opponent. That's when she felt a hand running through her hair. She turned around, facing Issei who was just standing there, as if enjoying the moment as he gently pet her head. His other hand was in his pocket and his eyes were closed. He was giving her this wide smile that seemed so pure and innocent. He put away his weapon, she thought. She brought around her spear and tried to thrust it into his throat before he blurred once more and now stood to her side, his mouth lingering over her ear. His breath felt warm against her neck, making her shiver slightly. "You look cuter as you Uma," he whispered. She was now pulsing with rage. Her face dripped with anger as she manifested another light spear in her other hand, twirling around and trying to catch him in his stomach. Issei stepped back as the spear grazed his shirt, making a long cut on it. "Aw, I just bought this," he remarked, slightly disappointed. Raynare was now even angrier than before, not taking his goofy behavior kindly. She bent down and flapped her wings, sending her barreling towards him with both spears directed at the center of his chest. "Mirror image," he muttered. Issei's figure was engulfed in a slight mist. When it had subsided, Raynare stopped midair and stood 2 feet away from him. Or should I say, them. Before her stood 5 figures, each identical to Issei's appearance. They were all smiling devilishly at her, hands in their pockets. She threw a spear at the closest one and watched as the figure was impaled by her weapon, only to dissipate into a small smoke cloud. The 4 remaining figures chuckled. She threw her other spear at the illusion farthest to the left, ending up with the same result. "Only a coward uses cheap tricks like this," she growled. "I don't want to fight you, Ray," all 3 figures said in unison, grinning widely as Raynare grew ever angrier at the nickname he just called her. "Don't you ever call me that again," she shouted, sending another spear hurtling towards another illusion, making it dissipate and leaving only 2 figures left before her. She cracked a smile as she created 2 more light spears and lunged towards them both, burying her weapons deep into each chest as she relaxed a bit, victorious. Both figures disappeared in a cloud of smoke. "Okay, that's enough of that," said a voice behind her. She tried to turn around, but she blacked out before she could, feeling something cold and metal touch the back of her head gently. Raynare woke up in a dark room, sore and unable to think clearly. She was lying down on a soft brown couch in what seemed to be a nice little home. There was a cold cup of tea on the table next to her. She squinted as she tried to figure out where she was. This isn't the church, she thought, maybe Azazel's place. No, this is far too modest to be his condo. She looked around for another minute or so before giving up, concluding that she must have been taken into the home of someone else. Her eyes widened at the memory of what happened right before she blacked out. Damn. The dragon kid. He was stronger than I expected. Reluctantly, she reached for the cup of tea, hoping to ease the dry feeling in her mouth and throat. Her back ached and her feet swelled slightly, but it was nothing compared to what could have happened if the boy even gave a shit in their fight. Her hand finally made contact with the teacup, its warm and soft skin feeling rather nice against her. He mumbled, stirring from his sleep. "You need something rare, eh?" Raynare could only watch in horror as a figure manifested itself from the shadows before her, its head buried in his left arm as his right clung to the teacup. Their hands were still touching each other, hers wrapped around his gently. He was sleeping on the table across from where the couch was, wherein she was currently lying down on. "Fuck," she yelled in her head. Issei lifted his head up from his slumber. "Oh, right," he said warmly, greeting the girl with a smile. "I took the liberty of taking you home after Azazel and I finished talking." He sat up straight and noticed the teacup in their hands. "What a waste, it's gone cold," he remarked as he released his hand from hers and started walking to the kitchen with the cup. "I'll make us some more." Raynare was still staring where she has been for the past 30 seconds, paralyzed by the shock of discovering where she was and who was with her. "You took me here? Are you stupid?" She started questioning, rage seeping into her voice with every syllable. "You think just because you let me sleep on your couch and offer me some tea that I'll forget who you are? I'll be damned if I let you." "Please keep your voice down, my parents are sleeping," he interrupted. "And believe me, I will answer all your questions and concerns once I settle down with you comfortably," he said calmly as he continued to make tea for the 2 of them, not even turning to face her as he poured the hot water into the pot. After what seemed like years for Raynare when it was actually about 2 minutes, Issei walked back and sat where he was before, placing a tray on the table, on which were 2 cups and a pot. He placed a cup on the table in front of him and placed the other in front of his guest. He started pouring into her cup when she suddenly asked, "Who are you?" Her voice dripping with what seemed like fear. "That must be the 1,000th time someone's asked me that in the past 3 days, he remarked. "To answer your question, I'm Issei Haidu from Kuo Academy, and I happen to be the proud wielder of 2 sacred gears, the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear and the Black Winged Assassin's gravity gauntlet," he began to explain, "and 4 days ago I was dead." He then began to explain everything that's happened to him, starting with a meeting in his previous timeline. She took it surprisingly well, only reacting to some parts, especially the part where Issei kills her at the church as she finished her master plan to impress Azazel. She was slightly depressed after hearing that a group of ragtag devils managed to usurp her plans, and not only that, kill her and her comrades. But after a bit more of the story, her eyes seemed to light up in amusement and enjoyed the story, like a little girl being told a bedtime story. She laughed at most parts, especially the part where Issei became the victim of an unintentional harem during the swimming pool debacle. She didn't even realize that she had drank nearly 9 cups of tea. Which brings us here at my home, he finished, smiling. Raynare simply smiled back. She got on the floor, crawling on all fours toward Issei. She rounded the corner as Issei simply stared in shock and started to back up slightly. She was now in front of him, inching closer and closer, and pushed him down onto the floor as she climbed on top of him. She brought her mouth down to his ear and whispered, "You're one hell of a virgin." She then roared in laughter as Issei shoved her off of him. He smirked, "You can still be a deceptive bitch sometimes, you know that, right?" They exchanged more teases and laughter as they got along quite well. After an hour and a half, they were sitting on the couch, half asleep. Issei had collapsed and had fallen asleep ahead of her, who was sitting on the opposite end of the couch as she observed the boy who she shared her first kiss with. Azazel said that he would never return my feelings for him, she thought sadly. She brought her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, placing her chin on her arms as she did. But Issei, he loved me. No, loves me. She thought, a small grin escaping her lips. I did have fun with our date, and he is sweet, handsome, smart, and strong, everything a girl could ask for. She continued to wallow in her thoughts as the clock ticked in the background, being the only sound she heard. She looked at it, annoyance overflowing from her expression. She read the time, 11:11 at night. Well, would you look at that, she softly muttered. Raynare closed her eyes, trying to fall asleep for the 7th time that night. Why can't I sleep? She asked herself. With her eyes closed, she started thinking about the things that Issei just revealed to her. She slowly began to recall everything and was about to fall asleep when she remembered what she just thought about. Her heart began to pound, resounding in her chest harder and harder with every beat. Sweat started to form on her forehead. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to be drowned out by her heartbeat. But her mind had it the worst. Her head was filled with mixed emotions towards Issei. He loves me, she thought. Her head suddenly started to flash back to the first time she heard of him. She had been reported to by her sources that there was a twice critical sacred gear wielder in Kuo, and she began to search for him, intending to snuff him before he can manage to do any harm to her plans. When she first saw him, she scoffed at the sheer perverseness of the weakling that was Issei Haidu. She laughed at his attempts to peek into the girls' changing area and watched in amusement as he got his ass handed to him by the kendo club. That's when she decided to make her move, and when she saw him loathing his virginity on the overpass while the sunset bathed him in its colorful embrace, she couldn't pass up the moment. She transformed into her innocent human form and decided on her name. Uma, because she would kill him at sunset after their date. And so she acted all shy and innocent and approached him. But something happened right before he looked up at her. For some reason, the scrawny pervert that she had observed suddenly had strong muscles and gave off a powerful aura. That's when he came back, she thought. Then she remembered their date and, well, she could only blush to herself. Sure, she was reluctant at first, but when he bought her that bracelet and the way in which he had her try it, she couldn't help but fall for him just a little bit. She lied to herself and thought that he was pathetic, even making a face when she turned away from him. But deep down, Raynare knew. Her heart beat faster and faster before it suddenly went silent when she said, "He loves me, and I think I love him." She returned her attention to the boy who was sleeping in front of her. For some reason, she felt drawn to him somehow, as if a baser urge within her loathed for contact with his strong, muscular arms and his solid formed chest and crap, she thought as she finally gave in. She inched closer to him and snuggled into his open arm, resting her head on his chest. Her free hand subconsciously started to eel up and grope his abdomen, marveling at his toned body as she did. After she had done quite a bit of exploring even under his shirt, she closed her eyes and let her hand roam freely. She was drifting off to sleep herself when her hand came across something soft but firm. She started groping it and feeling around, trying to figure out what it was. She was close to guessing, but she wasn't fast enough. Are you going to be doing that all night? It sort of keeps me from sleeping, he told her. Raynare opened her eyes to see her hand gently grasping his groin. She froze for a moment, surprised at what she was holding and its size. She then smiled deviously. She knew what she wanted. You up for a little game? She cooed seductively up at Issei. What sort of game, exactly? He asked nervously as she climbed on top of him, sitting astride him. She grinded her groin on his as she slid upwards, squeezing his growing bulge into the crevice of her butt. He moaned ever so softly, a blush spreading across his face. You know, for a virgin, you sure can kiss, she teased before bringing her mouth next to his ear again as she whispered, but I can do so much better. She began to kiss his neck and back of his ear, licking and sucking gently. Issei gasped and gripped her hair with one of his hands, his other reaching down to cup her posterior. His bulge grew larger and harder as she began to kiss him deeply and nibble on his lips. "I was holding back before because I was surprised," she explained. "But now, I have the upper hand." She began to grind on him, her butt massaging his manhood. He groaned slightly before he firmly squeezed her butt, making her moan slightly into his neck as she continued pleasuring him. His hand gripped her head and pulled her into a kiss as he continued to play with her posterior as she grinded against him. As if suddenly powered by lust, Issei brought both of his hands to her chest, and in one swift motion, he ripped her leather top open, exposing her large breasts. She gasped in surprise before grinning and nodding for him to continue. He started to grope both mounds with his hands as they continued to kiss. At first he was stroking them, feeling how soft they were, before he started weighing them, making them bounce up and down slightly in his hands, and finally he started to squeeze them lightly. She gave appreciative moans, and her hand now gripped onto his neck tightly, thrusting her tongue deep into his mouth. While it was there, she stopped kissing and started to give off even louder moans as he started sucking on her tongue, not giving her any rest. He pushed her away, saliva bridging their mouths as he did. They stared deeply into each other's eyes for a moment as they panted heavily, catching their breaths. He then set his sights on her voluptuous breasts, and he swiftly took one of her now taut nipples in his mouth. He lapped around its base with his tongue as he played with her other nipple with his left hand. His right hand snaked around her waist and once again held onto her butt firmly. He gently licked, sucked, and nibbled on the teat in his mouth, making her arch her back and shove her breast into his face in ecstasy. She moaned loudly and almost constantly, even more so as Issei did the same to her other breast. I'm getting unwet," she almost mumbled as she fought back her moans. Issei suddenly brought his mouth up to hers and locked lips with her again, exchanging saliva as they did. He got a firm grip on her waist with both hands, and he stood up, prompting Raynare to wrap her legs around him as he carried her, kissing all the while. He brought her down gently onto the table, knocking off a cup from the table, making it shatter on the floor. But they didn't even bat an eye, they were too caught up in their sexual drive. Issei began snaking down from her mouth, planting soft kisses on her neck, chest, stomach, and then right above her leather underwear. He looked up at her, his eyes asking for her permission. She nodded, and Issei brought his hand up to slip off her soaking wet. "Now, son, when we agreed to let her stay the night," his father started as he flipped on the light switch, "you promised something like this wouldn't happen." He looked at the couple sternly. Raynare gasped and squealed, bringing her arms up to cover her breasts and kicking Issei on his collarbone. Issei looked up at his father apologetically and was about to say sorry when his father interrupted, "But I can't tell you how proud we are," he exclaimed, a smile that reached his ears now taking the place of his stern expression from just moments ago. "Oh, yes, we thought you would die a virgin," chimed in Issei's mother. "And to do it with such an attractive young lady." Issei blushed as Raynare composed herself again, now giggling slightly at watching Issei squirm from embarrassment. Eventually they ended up sleeping, Raynare in the guest room and Issei in his room. But, of course, Raynare wanted to tease and seduce Issei more, so she snuck into his bed before morning came. Issei woke up and instead of being surprised, smiled at the feeling of nostalgia this gave him, as well as the fact that the girl he loved seemed to return his feelings. But his smile faded away almost instantly. He closed his eyes and tensed at the memory of his dream. Issei's dream. "Where am I?" "You're dreaming, partner. And sometimes we want to talk to you. So we borrow you from your dream. What do you want to talk about?" "Dear, I know that it can be hard not to, but I must ask you to stop telling people about your little time traveling escapade." "What? Why?" "Partner, whenever you do, you're creating a small tear in the boundary between this dimension and any other dimension. And if this boundary rips apart, this entire universe that you and I know and love will be sucked into the dimensional gap, forever lost. This has already happened several times, and usually it takes only one person to be told in order to rip the boundary. But thankfully, I can patch the tears with the help of Drake's power. But she and I can only do so much at a time. So please, at least for now, don't tell a soul. We'll inform you when you can tell another person. Just be sure you do it in private so that no one else hears you. If they speculate or figure it out themselves, it won't harm the boundary. But if the person you told about it tells another person, it could create an even larger tear." "I see. So I have to tell them to keep it a secret?" "Yes. Azazel already knows that, so I wouldn't worry about him. But make sure your new friend knows as well." "Okay, and thank you. Whenever I can again, please tell me." Issei brought along Raynare in her uniform as he went to school. She wrapped her arms around his strong one, and as they walked people gawked at them, both students and adults. "Is that Hiro, Issei? Who is that cute girl with her? Whoa, is that really Haidu the perv? And who is that smokin' hot chick with him? Isn't it the Haidu child, the pervert prodigy of his father? Pervert prophet Issei has landed a cute girl." If this is what it's like now, Issei sighed to himself, I can't wait for Mitsuda and Motohama's reaction. But they were absent that day. Issei didn't give it much thought as he brought Yuma to the student council office and asked if she could enroll. Sona was very reluctant at first, but Issei froze time in the room, along with everyone in it. He brought out his eye of Draconis and muttered, Jericho, and Sona's metaphorical walls of doubt and reason came tumbling down. Issei snapped his fingers and dismissed his eye of Draconis, then he had Zekro release her grip on the room. No one noticed anything, of course, but Sona felt a little lightheaded. Not wanting to show her weakness, she simply tried to stay calm and answer him, but his gaze pierced right through her, and she weakly replied and gave Raynare consent to enroll. They went to the school office and got her fitted, but for the day at least, Yuma had to attend class the same as Issei's, by her request in her casual clothes. At the end of the day, Issei had gotten many glances of sheer evil, all the students ripping him apart in their heads. Yuma simply giggled and latched onto his arm even more, even giving him a small peck on the cheek when they were at lunch, causing even more trouble for him. Before they left school, they picked up the uniforms and headed home. Strange, he thought as he was walking back. Yuma was talking on and on about something, but he wasn't paying her any attention. Rias and the gang never once checked on me. Did something happen? He asked himself, trying to recall if he had done something to them. No, he dismissed the thought, they're probably just giving me some space. But unbeknownst to Issei, trouble was brewing in the occult research club. He brought a fallen angel to school, Rias yelled. Yes, came Sona's calm reply. She tried to hide her emotions, but she knew she had messed up. And you let her enroll? Yes, Sona bit her lip. She tried to remember what was going through her head when she gave her permission to Issei. One moment she had already dismissed the thought without much effort or thought, then the next she was confused and felt dizzy. She remembered looking up at his eyes, his beautiful hazel eyes, and felt trust and comfort wash over her. She clenched her fists. Is she sick? Impossible, she thought. I haven't been pierced by any light spears recently, and we can't catch human diseases. But Sona couldn't shake this feeling inside of her. It was as if they had a connection, deep and heavy. When she looked into his eyes and he into hers, she could feel her heart beat a little faster and louder, and everything around her seemed to fade away as they stared at each other. His strong gaze finally broke through her, and she let him get inside her head. Her thoughts became his thoughts, and she let him have his way. I was weak, she thought, nothing more. But she knew that something else was going on here. For now, she chose to focus on the rage that Rias emanated. I don't know what's gotten into you, Sona, Rias continued, but you need to keep it together. Issei Haidu is a very powerful threat to us as of the moment, and we can't afford to let our guards down. And you were thinking straight when you first saw him. When you had him followed. When you had your peerage risk their lives and anonymity in the school, when you had them try and capture him. Sona began to talk back. Or maybe it was when you were so prepared to have your peerage stalk him during their date and even go so far as to have your familiar give him a summoning flyer so that you could revive him as your own. She jabbed. Rias reeled back, along with everyone in the room, with a sudden outburst from the usually calm and calculated Sona. They could see that something was clearly wrong with her, and Akeno was about to ask before Rias held up her hand. Thank you for your time, Sona, Tsubaki, she dismissed the argument. Sona narrowed her eyes in resentment. Very well, she responded. She stood up, motioned for Tsubaki to do the same, and together they walked out of the orc room. On the way to the student council office, Tsubaki decided to give it a try. Kaichu, she began, is something wrong? Are you feeling ill? Did Haidu do something to you? She pestered. Sona didn't respond, not even looking at her queen. Her head was repeating the events in the office earlier that day over and over again, trying to figure out what she was feeling. But she suddenly stopped with her eyes wide open, prompting Tsubaki to ask what was happening. Sona began to mumble, her eyes still popping with shock. Tsubaki gave her a questioning look, again about to ask if she was okay before Sona suddenly fainted. Back at the orc, everyone felt a little unsettled at what just occurred. Rias was once again watching the sunset from her usual spot, staring out the window nearest her desk. Akeno was sipping her tea on the couch, but anyone could notice the slight shaking her hand was making as she brought the teacup to her mouth again. Hiba was leaning onto his spot on the wall, but he hung his head, his bangs casting a shadow over his eyes. Even Kaneko seemed uneasy, her bag of sweets was empty now. Well, maybe not Kaneko, but everyone felt a little worried. Akeno was the first to speak up. So he brings a fallen angel to the school. Knowing just how careful Issei must be to have eluded us for the past 16 years, he must have told her to keep a low profile, she reasoned, trying to calm everyone's worries. That may be so, Rias replied, but it doesn't change the fact that he's an even bigger threat to us now, somehow managing to get the girl who was trying to kill him to fall for him like that. Hiba looked up. Maybe she's still tricking him, he thought out loud, maybe he still doesn't know. Not likely. He was very powerful and smart, Kaneko added. And I think he was the cause of the massive power surge a few days ago. It happened while I was watching them at the overpass, but I never thought that it was him. Riaz nodded. Indeed, he would have known she was a fallen angel at first glance and figure she was going to kill him, she said calmly. He must have persuaded her, using some form of magic or spell. Maybe the same he used on Sona? Akeno asked. Everyone nodded in agreement. So what's the plan, Butchu? Kiba inquired. Riaz sighed deeply, closing her eyes. We wait, she responded, but we can't let our guards down. No matter what type of convincing or persuasion, be it magic or begging and tears, we can't let him have his way with us as he did Sona. I fear he is even more sly and deceptive than that fallen angel. Bro, what do we do? Asked a teenage boy. I'm not sure, came the reply from another wearing glasses. We can't really talk to him right now, not after what we saw. Yeah. Did you see his arms and his eye? Like something straight out of a comic book. Don't be so enthusiastic, the other reprimanded, besides, we were right in thinking that there was something off with the girl. I know, Brasif. What was she, exactly? It seemed like a movie, she was making spears out of thin air and throwing them at Issei. And not only that, what were they talking about? It sounded like a fantasy otaku's wet dream. And who was that shady dude, Mr. Blonde Bangs? Let's just wait and see. But one thing's for sure, Issei is not who we thought he was. I'm a little worried, man. I don't want anything to happen to my friend. Our friend, the one with glasses, corrected. Believe me, I'm worried too. End of the part 1. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.